All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Lee Fisher, President and CEO of a national organization called CEOs for Cities, but much more importantly, a longtime member of the City Club. 154 years ago, Charles Dickens, in A Tale of Two Cities, wrote these words. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, and it was the winter of despair. Those words could just as easily have been written today about the two alternate realities of today's America. Today is a tale of two futures. One of the foolishness and darkness of Washington, D.C., the other the wisdom, hope, and light of our cities and our metro regions. I recently moderated a panel at the Clinton Global Initiative, and the president of Iceland, Ólafur Grimsson, said something that struck a nerve with me. He said, "The problem with you Americans is that you spend too much time waiting for Washington." He's right. Every day, Washington proves the old adage that the difference between genius and stupidity is that genius has its limits. Today, it's my privilege to introduce someone who's not waiting. Instead, he's working in our own backyards, on the field, in our cities, in our regions, where the rubber meets the road, the ball meets the bat, and risk meets results. He understands better than anyone I know that cities and metro regions are the revolutionary new ground game. Bruce Katz is the Vice President and Founding Director of the Brookings Institution Metropolitan Policy Program and co-author of the exciting new book, The Metropolitan Revolution. I had the privilege of working with Bruce when I served as Lieutenant Governor and Director of the Howe Department of Development, and I'm very excited that in just 4 days, Bruce will speak at the CEOs for Cities National Conference, where 300 leaders from 75 cities will hear the same speech. You are about to hear from Bruce about a revolutionary team of change makers and disruptors who are defying expectations, fixing our broken politics, and bringing our wild card economy into postseason play. The roster of its players include people like Mayor Jackson, Mayor Plisquellic in Akron, County Executive Ed Fitzgerald, Dave Abbott, Ron Richard, Brad Whitehead, Rebecca Bagley, Ned Hill, Dr. Luis Proenza, Hunter Morrison, Jan Roller, Peggy Zone Fisher, I'm going home tonight, John Begala, Jennifer Thomas, Terry Francona, Nick Swisher, and Jason Giambi. Yes, if Bruce Katz knew about the Cleveland Indians' revolutionary ground game, he would have written about them too. Ladies and gentlemen, and our broadcast audience, Bruce Katz.
So, first of all, most importantly, congratulations on the Indians. Okay. So as I was driving in, the cab driver said to me, "So what do you think about the Indians?" I said, "I only follow one sport in the United States, and that's politics. So fill me in." Congratulations. And also, I just wanted to add to what Lee said. There are times where I feel that this book was co-written by all the people you just mentioned, plus several others like Bob Jaquay and Richard Shatton, who had a profound influence on my thinking, right? Cleveland has really been at the vanguard of network thinking, collaboration across corporate civic and government and philanthropy. It may not feel like that all the time, but let me take you to some places where none of that is happening, right? So it was wonderful to write about the post-hero economy and to write about Cleveland and Northeast Ohio, Akron, Canton, Youngstown, as really embodying that post-hero economy. There's one other person I want to thank, or else I can't go home. Bud Talbot is here. He is the father of my boss, Strobe Talbot, but he's also had a phenomenal impact. And also David Beach is here. I mean, talk about impact in this country. Let's start with some sober news. But I think it ultimately will be exhilarating and liberating. We are living in a pivotal decade. We may not know that at times because it's hard when there's so much disruptive change and volatile change, but it's pivotal. And it's pivotal partly because it's the aftermath of the Great Recession. There's very few recessions that are called great, right? We still have to make up 10 million jobs to make up the job, or grow 10 million jobs to make up the jobs we lost during the downturn and to keep pace with population and labor dynamics. But we have to grow better jobs. We had 80 million people in this country in poverty and near poverty in 2000. Today, 107 million. A quantum leap in one decade, not just because of the recession, but because of collapse in manufacturing in the early part of the last decade and the radiating effect that that collapse had. Now, in theory, what we should be talking about is the shift of an economic growth model, a vision of an economy that won pre-recession, a land of bad habits, an economy characterized by consumption and debt and financial engineering, right, to an economy where we go back to fundamentals. What made Northeast Ohio great, an economy fueled by innovation, yes, idea generation, but also manufacturing and entrepreneurship, an economy powered by lower carbon, so we can be at the vanguard of the next industrial revolution, an economy that is driven by exports and foreign investment and global engagement and immigration, because that is the future of America. And if you build that economy, guaranteed, it will be rich with opportunity. Now, also in theory, it would be good to have a national government to help stimulate and guide this restructuring. But we have a minor challenge. I was telling some of the folks at lunch, I turned on the television last night in a hotel in Boston to see Senator Cruz read from Green Eggs and Ham, and I was wondering whether I was having an out-of-body experience. So I thank him for arranging his filibuster during the book tour in the Metropolitan Revolution. But there is a structural challenge that we face. It's not just a cyclical issue around partisan gridlock or ideological polarization. Structurally, what the national government does in the United States is about to shift, right? Because of the aging of the population, we are going to see, and we've known this for 25 years, right? We're going to see a major shift of what the federal government spends its money on to entitlement programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So within 10 years, 50% of the federal budget will basically be health care and retirement, and we'll see an increase of $1.6 trillion a year in those mandatory programs. What will happen? It will begin to squeeze down spending, investment in defense, in research and development, in infrastructure, in housing, in education, in skills. There will never be a memo from the federal government to the states and the cities and metros, oh, by the way, you're now in charge of investing for the future. But that's what's happening in the United States. That's the harsh reality. This is the good news. What we see around the United States are cities and metropolitan areas, not uniformly, but increasingly the major ones, stepping up and doing the hard work to grow jobs and make their economies more prosperous and invest for the future. And we're not just talking about elected officials. We're talking about the networks of institutions and leaders that co-produce these economies and co-govern these communities. Now, how can metros do this? They are very powerful economically. There are 388 metropolitan areas in the United States. The top 100 alone sit on only 12% of our land mass. They're 2/3 of our population, and they're 3/4 of our GDP. But most importantly, on every indicator that drives a modern, sophisticated, powerful economy, skilled workers, infrastructure to move people, goods, energy, and ideas, advanced industry, innovation, they're at 75, 80, 85, 90% and above of the nation's share. There is no American economy What we really are a network of metropolitan economies that punch way above their weight, and the rest of the world, China included, wants to be like us. Now, what's happening in these cities and metropolitan areas are they're beginning to change their growth model to one around production and innovation, and here's why. For decades, the United States built its economy on debt and consumption. For cities, this meant throwing public money at sports arenas and stealing businesses from their neighbors with tax breaks. But what about after the game? You can't build an economy around beer and hot dogs. And what happens when the businesses you stole leave for a better deal somewhere else? The Great Recession was a wake-up call. We forgot the fundamentals. Productive and innovative growth drive consumption, not the other way around. Smart metro leaders are going back to basics, investing in infrastructure, making manufacturing a priority again, connecting small businesses with investors in new markets, helping workers get the skills they need. If metros get the basics right, the beer and hot dogs will follow. I'm not very popular with sports teams, and that's why I don't follow them. So what this book is about are stories, case studies of cities and metropolitan areas and their networks that really are stepping up and doing the hard work of restructuring our economy. So Denver and Los Angeles, investing in modern state-of-the-art transit with local resources primarily, so they can obviously grow in more sustainable ways, but send a signal to the world we are a global metropolis, not defined by sprawl, not defined by low-density development. Northeast Ohio. What you have built here, starting with Greater Cleveland Partnership, but with the Fund for Our Economic Future, financed by the philanthropies, these really smart intermediaries like Nordtech and Bioenterprise, you've built a platform for a smart, innovative manufacturing economy, small and medium-sized firms getting the support they need to strengthen their business plans, retool their facilities, retrain their workers, and compete on the global market. That is smart economic development. New York. If we went to New York 7 years ago and you asked Bloomberg, what's your economic play? I'm subsidizing 2 stadia on the west side. Parasitic economy. Today, what is happening is they are attracting world-beating institutions, engineering, Cornell, Technion to Roosevelt Island to be a platform for technology-driven growth, innovation-driven growth. Houston, one of the most diverse metropolitan areas in the United States, they have built a network of 21st century settlement houses that are integrating tens of thousands of immigrants into the economic and social mainstream, giving them access to low-cost banking, English as a second language, skills training, charter schools, right? That's how America grows. Portland, weird and crunchy, right? The last bastion of hippiedom in the United States. This is an export powerhouse. I will come back to Portland and talk a little bit more about what they're doing. And even Detroit, a city in bankruptcy, a city of 138 square miles that has seen massive population loss over time, they are beginning to revive the city from its core. Only about 3% of the land mass, 40% of the jobs, but the downtown, the riverfront, Old Woodward Corridor, and then up into Midtown, Wayne State, Henry Ford Health System, they're anchors, like your great anchors in this city. That's how a great city revives. That's how a great metropolis revives. So let's go to Portland, move a little west. And I think what Portland realized in the context of the recession is they were hit hard, right? They had 11% unemployment. Things were pretty grim, really, when we hit the low point of the recession. So they began to think about, what are our assets here? Okay, what makes us distinctive in the world today? And what they realized when they ran the numbers was they had an enormous amount of their economy dedicated, building off an export platform. Computers and electronics for sure, but also sustainable products and sustainable services, because many environmental firms have been attracted to Portland because they had an urban growth boundary. They tore down a freeway. They put transit into their city in the early 1970s. So they thought, we have assets that the weird and crunchy brand doesn't quite capture. So if you go to Google today and you put in "We Build Green Cities," Portland will show up, and here's why. Here's the mayor and some of the other key civic leaders talking about why they chose sustainability and exports as their growth strategy.
Sustainability is, as an emerging industry, the sustainable technology and sustainable services industries is a little abstract for some people, and we saw that as a competitive advantage.
We know how to build cities. We have companies that do the architectural services, the clean technology, the green roofs, all the things that go into making a green city. And don't you want your city to be a little bit like this as well?
What it is that Portland has to offer, and as most of the rest of the world continues to urbanize at a drastically faster pace, we think we have a package of services and goods that are going to be incredibly valuable to those economies all around the world.
So think Beijing, right? Think many of the small, middle-sized cities in China, 5 million, 10 million, right? Think Sao Paulo, think Rio, think Mumbai, think Delhi. What do they need? They need what Portland has. Sustainable products, sustainable services, so you can breathe the air and drink the water, right, and live in a walkable community of quality. That's what Portland has to offer. So these are our stories. We're sticking by them, right? And we could have chosen 20 others. And what we are hoping to do is to populate this map with game-changing interventions and transformative investments all over the country, while Washington continues to be on a frolic and detour. Now, how do you start your own revolution? First, you create a network. I mean, this is very much the Northeast Ohio story, right? Because cities and metros are not governments. They are networks themselves of institutions and leaders who co-produce the economy. Now, in New York, the network around applied sciences was really the power of a mayor, a very wealthy mayor, to convene corporate, civic, and university leaders and crowdsource what's going to be the idea to help us diversify our economy. In Northeast Ohio, it really is a network of networks, Fund of Economic Future acting as a hub. In Detroit, it's sort of a loose affiliation of billionaires and millionaires. They're not quite a formal network, right? But they're beginning to act together towards one unified outcome. Then you set your vision, right? The great 20th century philosopher Dolly Parton said, find out who you are and do it on purpose, right? It's not about building the Walmart economy, because that's ubiquitous across the United States. It's about what makes Phoenix special versus Pittsburgh, or Detroit special versus Denver. What differentiates you in our domestic economy and our global economy? Well, what New York looked at when they had to go through this assessment, too much dependence on financial services and not enough STEM skills, right? You know, Columbia and NYU are great schools, but they don't really supply that engineering and technology talent into multiple sectors and industries. Portland, again, realized we're an export powerhouse and we can export the clean economy, because that's a very large economy that the rest of the world wants. And Detroit, again, found their game changer from a relatively small portion of the city and the metropolis, the downtown and the midtown, where you had your historic assets and advantages. And the final piece is find your game changer, right? It's an overused term, but if you go around the country and say to folks, what changed the trajectory of this economy over the past 50 or 75 years? What was the 1 or 2 or 3 interventions? Many people can point to those interventions. We know something important when it happens. So in New York and in Northeast Ohio and Detroit, the game changers are all around innovation, right? Because that is really the driving force of our economy, but they're different kind of interventions. New York City wanted an institutional platform for the future. Northeast Ohio wants to support this incredibly innovative manufacturing sector. The notion that manufacturing is the old economy is nonsense. Manufacturing is the next economy because it's infused with technology and infused with services. And Detroit, finding the spatial geography of innovation. 30 years ago, if you wanted to find the innovative economy, you would get in your car and you would drive 30 miles out from the central core, and then you would find a science park with corporate campuses that were isolated because they were focused on inventing in secret. Today, because of demographic preferences and talented workers want livable, walkable communities, but companies want open innovation. They want to operate through the synergistic effect of companies dealing with other companies and other clusters and talented workers walking out of their office building and having a bump and mingle, right, where ideas are shared and new products and new services are developed. So if we do all this together, we can't completely zone out Washington because they happen to be like a crazy uncle who's your biggest benefactor, right? They just haven't checked into the real world for quite some time. So you can't completely tune them out because they're sending you checks every year. But if we begin to invent and innovate from this level, we can change the whole notion of how our country governs itself and powers itself for the future. Listen to this. From an early age, we are taught how our nation is supposed to work. The president, vice president, and members of Congress sit at the top. Governors and legislators run their states. The rest of us take our cues from them. While states and the federal government may be part of the Constitution, our population and economic power is actually concentrated in our metropolitan areas. It's time to rethink power in America. In this century, metros will lead and states and the federal government will follow. In cities and metros, public, private, and civic leaders are helping workers get the skills they need, investing in infrastructure and growing jobs through expanded trade and investment, the hard work necessary to renew our economy. So only in America can you do this and not get your passport revoked. But that's our subtle message. We're sticking by it. Looking forward to your questions.
For those of you who believe that the gong should only be done twice, I don't think I'll ever be invited back, and I want to do it in the middle of the program, not just at the end. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're listening to a special program featuring Bruce Katz, Vice President and Founding Director of the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program and co-author of the Metropolitan Revolution. We're going to return momentarily for our traditional City Club questions. We encourage you to formulate questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here and those joining via broadcast on WVIZ PBS 90.3 WCPN and 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, WTAM, and one of our major broadcast partners across the country. Broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC, and our live broadcast, our webcast, is being supported by the University of Akron. There are a lot of programs taking place at the City Club in October. The City Club celebrates Hispanic Heritage Month with the Honorable Pedro Perzulli, Resident Commissioner of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, and Janet Puerga, President of the National Council of La Raza. Please visit our website for more information about our upcoming programs. To make a reservation or to order a CD or DVD of one of our programs, refer to the website cityclub.org. We welcome guests today at tables hosted by the Center for Community Solutions, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, Cleveland State University, the Fund for Our Economic Future, the George Gund Foundation, the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs, and the University of Akron. And we thank you for your support. Today's program is sponsored by the Unger Family Foundation in recognition of the partnership between the City Club and the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs, our partner for the program. And joining us at the head table again is Alan Unger. And Alan, you've been introduced twice, but this is my script, so stand up, be recognized. Today is also the annual Nelson E. Weiss Memorial Forum, made possible by a generous gift from the friends and family of Nelson Weiss. Joining us today at the head table are Nelson Weiss's children, David, Rebecca, and Virginia's husband, Stephen Sidham. Would you please all stand and be recognized? We'd also like to welcome students from Gilmore Academy's Rebuilding Cleveland class to today's forum. Student participation is made possible by a generous gift from Pipeline Development. So will the Gilmore students please stand and be recognized? Now we want to return to Bruce Katz for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is City Club Development Associate Mike Cromaldi and Program Director Carrie Miller. And one more time, first question, please. Okay.
And I'm talking about the tale of two cities. Grand Rapids, Michigan is being that is one of the most desirable places to live. And we know that the city of Detroit is going through their bankruptcy issues. And it seems like there's a negative perception of the Great Lakes region where we continue to lose job loss and we also lose loss of population. Where does Cleveland fit in that area?
So that's a great question. And I think the United States, like many parts of Western Europe, and frankly parts of Japan, has gone through a period of deindustrialization and economic restructuring. In Northeast Ohio, it was really called a quiet crisis, really 10 years ago, and that's what led many of the philanthropies, like Gund and Cleveland and others, and really across this great four-metro region, to really invest in a new set of institutions and intermediaries. But at the heart of the decline over a period, or the challenges over a period of decades, was a broader economic restructuring, both in the United States and Western Europe and Japan. Now, something has happened literally in the past 5 or 7 years that is beginning to revalue this region, and is particularly revaluing the cores, the central cities, the downtowns and midtowns of this region. There is the potential to have a manufacturing renaissance in the United States because of the energy revolution underway in our country, because of broader global dynamics, because of an understanding that production and innovation go hand in hand. And the United States really was never a post-industrial economy, though that's what people called it. We still have a very strong base of manufacturing here, and this region and Southeast Michigan and other parts of the Midwest are beginning to see a resurgence, right? This is a real natural asset. The second piece is cities. Central cities, the cores of cities, are having a resurgence because, again, millennials, empty nesters, a whole group of different demographic cohorts are saying, we want livability, we want walkability, we want to have transportation choice when we leave our home and go to work or carry out the necessities of daily life. And again, companies are looking for that proximity effect, the density effect of being close to other companies and not being walled off. So these are big, profound forces that are playing themselves out on the landscape of Northeast Ohio and the broader Midwest. The question for the United States, I mean, the challenge for us is how do we bring along tens of millions of people? Look at the poverty numbers that I put up before. How do we ensure that the economic resurgence and the revitalization of our cities really work to the benefit of a broad swath of our citizenry? And that's going to require an intense focus on education and skills, but just not four-year degrees as the ultimate outcome. Skill, technology, computer science, what we used to call vocational education, what we used to call SHOP, right? I'm one of the people who can remember SHOP. I failed miserably at SHOP. But I fundamentally believe we've got to bring back into the United States an intentional, disciplined focus on career and technical services. So the past is not prologue in the United States, right? There's always a second act in this country. And there are big forces at play that can really make Northeast Ohio and the Great Lakes region, the Midwest, a prosperous, competitive, inclusive region.
Bruce, I appreciate very much your comments. You've highlighted many of the positive things going on. You could have added the lack of support from most state governments. Right. For those of us who are out there on the front lines. They may be just as bad in Ohio as the folks in Washington. But my question is, you've outlined many of the positive steps and looking at strengths. I happen to think that you also have a need in a community, metropolitan area, region, to define what are your weaknesses. Right. And try to shore those up. Could you sort of share, as you looked at these different regions of the country, what is it that we're not doing that we really need to emphasize as we look at the positives and the strengths? What do we need to shore up?
So that's a really a great question, Mayor. And I would say in many parts of the country, we focus on the network, because I really do believe that in many ways what we've tended to measure in the United States is economic performance and economic profile. But if you're a foreign company or even a domestic company and you're looking where you might invest or expand a particular business, what you want to know is that you're going into a community where the corporate, civic, philanthropic, government leaders are really working together, particularly around the supply of skilled workers on a sustained basis, and where your cities and suburban areas and your metropolitan areas at a broader level are working together to lessen fiscal disparities, to lessen the divisions across the region. You want to be in a functioning place that is collaborating to compete. Jim Rukakis is here, former county treasurer. I mean, there are people in this room who clearly understand that in the United States, in many places, we've inherited, the British system of 13th century government, where every 5 blocks, hey, let's have another municipality and have it, rest on their own bottom, right? I'm not saying we should eliminate, right, or that duplication, but we need to learn how to work together, right? The competition in the world today is very fierce, and if we spend our time either in our separate guilds or in our separate jurisdictions or in our separate partisan alliances, we are really not acting in the service of our community. So those are the real challenges, frankly. Once you build a network, and once you steward a network, and once you build these great institutions and intermediaries that can help be in the service of economic growth and competitiveness, then you can do the kinds of investments and long-term strategic planning and execution. But when everyone is basically in their own silo or in their own foxhole, places cannot really thrive and prosper. So that's the reality of 21st century America. We could get away with fragmentation in the 20th century, particularly the late 20th century, because there was nothing really standing after World War II in the United States. But in this century, given the competition we face around the world, we really need to understand what collaboration and cooperation across sectors, disciplines, jurisdictions, party, and ideology really mean. And I believe a lot of people in this room are what I would call the pragmatic caucus. You put place over party, you put collaboration over conflict, and you put evidence over dogma. That's the future of the United States.
Thank you, Dr. Katz, for your thought-provoking presentation. My name is Michael Dover. I'm a social worker and sociologist and member of the City Club. I cited you in my dissertation in 2003 in social work and sociology on Ohio's urban system of real property and property tax exemptions. I cited you saying that enough of the small stuff, we need bold solutions to our urban social problems. In the same section, I cited Ned Hill saying we need radical solutions. And so my first general question is going to be, what specific, bold solutions do you have other than a mantra of economic growth, which you say will lead to guaranteed economic opportunities? Now, second question is more specific. Saturday night I was at the 100th anniversary gala of the Center for Community Solutions, United Way, and I had the pleasure of meeting a major funder who's a member, who's involved with the Fund for Economic Future. And I had a great conversation with her. I pointed out that in 1946, the Full Employment Act said the right to a job. The Mayor's Commission on Welfare in 1969 said the only solution to poverty in our cities is the right to a job at a living wage. Here we are 50 years later. What do you feel about the right to a job as part of your guaranteed economic opportunities?
Okay, those are two really wonderful questions. And first of all, thank you for citing me in your book. And second of all, you're not allowed to call me a doctor because I'm a lawyer. There isn't even a name for lawyers in the United States that is that can be talked about on public television. So what I mostly am is a political realist, right? And I think what we try to do in this book, and really in the work of the Brookings Institution, is unveil, first of all, obviously, the economic power and social possibilities that cities and metropolitan areas have, and then those precise policies that higher levels of government could undertake to buttress and leverage and help these places realize their full potential. On the investment side, what we have proposed is what we would call cut to invest. Because if you buy the theory that what really matters is a productive, innovative economy, and therefore a resilient and sustainable economy, the kinds of investments that matter are smart, strategic investments in advanced R&D, basic and applied science, which the private sector then can commercialize the ideas for products and services, infrastructure, right? Transport, energy, water, sewer, basic infrastructure to move people, goods, energy, and ideas, and skills, education and skills. Those are the investments that have to be made. Some of what has to happen in the United States is we have to cut legacy investments in consumption, and we're very popular with the home builders because we've called for radical shifts in the mortgage interest deduction, with a lot of the savings generated by that put back into R&D and put back into infrastructure. Very popular with the home builders. That's why I'm at the Brookings Institution and not elected to office. But I think actually in the coming tax reform that Washington will have to undertake, maybe not this year, maybe not in the next three years, but soon, in the next half decade, we're going to have to basically have Washington and states fit within their fiscal limits. Then the question is, what do you invest on? What will really power this country forward for the next half century and 75 years? I fundamentally believe that the United States is as powerful as it is today because we have built these advanced research institutions, these ecosystems of companies and entrepreneurs and universities, right? And we've made these investments over a sustained period of time. So there are other things I would hope that would happen around tax reform at the state level, lessening fiscal disparities between cities and older suburbs where so much of our poverty is sort of moving. But from my perspective, what might be doable if we really buy into this model is the kind of strategic investments that we can make as a country over time, coupled with private and civic financial innovation, and then focus on the skills question. I mean, we really have to give our children the skills to compete in this century. Because when we look around the world, that's what our competitors are doing. And I can't imagine a more important investment to make than in education and skills. Question?
Hi, Bruce. You mentioned that the next economy will need to be a low-carbon economy,
Yes.
so we can deal with critical issues like climate change. Can you elaborate on that and suggest some of the things that we should be focused on here in Northeast Ohio?
So we talk about a low-carbon economy, obviously, because, as Strobe Talbot says, climate is an existential threat. It affects all of us on this planet. We also believe that whichever country can lead the shift to a lower carbon economy will be at the vanguard of the next industrial revolution. Because when we've measured the clean economy, what others call the green economy, it's about 2.7 million jobs in this country. It's larger than the fossil fuel industry. It is more export-oriented. It is more innovation-oriented. It is more manufacturing-oriented than the economy as a whole. So we talk about the low-carbon economy, obviously because it has very beneficial environmental consequences for the United States and other countries, but we also talk about the low-carbon economy because we see it literally as the next industrial revolution. And it's a competitive world. And I don't think we concede, particularly when we see cities rising in China and in India and Brazil. What is happening in these countries is obviously the growth and the imperative for sustainability, as you saw from the Portland story before. And if we don't supply the goods and the services and the expertise and the capital then the Germans will, then the Japanese will, then the Chinese will. We will have basically lost market share of what could be one of the largest sort of burgeoning economies, super sectors of the economy in the world. So we have a little different take on this because we are really focusing on the economic consequences. And for Northeast Ohio, all I would say is that you have an innovation base, you have an incredible manufacturing base. If you begin to focus on clean economy products and services and actually create demand for those products and services through state policy, because the federal government may not be doing much of this, state policy, state procurement, right? I mean, a lot of the powers of the state and local government and of philanthropy and business can be put towards stimulating demand for these products and services. You have a chance, being this incredible ecosystem, to be at the vanguard of the clean economy. We should not allow ideological divisions over whether climate change exists or doesn't exist to stop places from understanding that there's a different green at stake. It's called money, and it's called profits, and it's called jobs, and it's called investment. You want to be at the vanguard of the next industrial revolution.
My name's Omar Azem, and I go to Gilmore Academy, and it was a wonderful presentation, and you speak a lot about the network, and I'm curious, what steps are necessary in building and forming these networks, and how does one go about setting up this sharing of resources and exchange of ideas at a metropolitan level? How do we make city-level leadership plausible and more impactful? And specifically speaking, as a student, how do we as students take part in strengthening the network, as the representative youth for this next generation? So. That's
a great question, great set of questions. Talking about building a network and stewarding a network can sound, this is a 1970s term, like a very heavy thing. I mean, it's like, how do we possibly do that? And at the end of the day, we're talking about people. I think we all know something about people, right? And we're social animals, and so much of this is about folks in one jurisdiction taking the risk, having the courage to cross that border, right, into the next municipality or into the next county and say, we need to problem solve together here. The notion that we should allow ourselves to be parochial or provincial or hyper-local when obviously the economy is metropolitan or regional is absurd. So let's not bound ourselves by these borders. Let's create a virtual region, and let's go break bread or have a beer, with our, okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay. Have an Arnold Palmer, just keep to the, to the low stuff here. When I grew up, it was 18, so now. So Chris Thompson from the Fund for an Economic Future had a great quote in the book where he talks about, for the price of buying donuts, for a whole series of meetings and convenings that were being held by institutions and intermediaries around the region, you were able to build the trust and confidence between people, because it can all sound really scary when we say, oh my God, we're going to have to go meet with this jurisdiction or this business or this philanthropy. But what it all comes down to is the kind of, consistent, sustained focus, right, on creating these kind of relationships. In terms of what the younger generation can do, we live in a participatory democracy that goes beyond the ballot box every year or 4 years for president, right? Everyone basically has their own megaphone right now, through Twitter, through Facebook, through LinkedIn, right? I mean, we communicate. We probably over-communicate. I mean, when you sit down with dinner with your parents, everyone's like, sort of on their little device. But that gives you power. That really gives you power, all citizens power, to basically call the shots as they are. I mean, you can watch the leadership in a region. You can see where they're collaborating to compete or where they're dividing themselves by old divisions, right? And that can be picked up obviously, by the mainstream media and can be picked up by political leaders who are aspiring to either continue in office or run for office, and it could be picked up by many other networks. So, I find America's democracy today to be evolving in very interesting ways. It is not just about the vote. It is really about constant participation in the decisions that really shape the future of a region. And I think you and your classmates got to wait to 21. But there's a lot of education you can do in the near term. Any other thoughts or questions? Oh, here we go.
Yes, thank you. I'm Joe Mersnick from Geauga County. Your comments are encouraging and enlightening. However, in contrast to the open-ended cooperation you call for, networking with elected officials, men and women of industry, ordinary citizens, in this region we have dark federal forces at work. They're called regionalists. Regionalism. This is the new buzzword where agencies such as HUD, the EPA, and others not yet even disclosed will start telling our counties how to do things. Redistribution of population, where you can do this, where you can't do that, and so forth. So I wonder if you might comment on this spread of regionalism, such, by the way, that has just been incorporated in Westchester County, New York, much to its detriment. Thank you.
I mean, at the end of the day, regionalism, just the ability of people and places to collaborate across jurisdiction and discipline and sectors and party and ideology, is really about creating more choice for people and firms. That's what it's about. I mean, it really gets to the heart of why America is such a powerful economy and such a powerful society, because we all grew up here with choices. And I think what is happening today is, given the restructuring of our economy, the shifting demographic preferences of our citizenry, we understand we need more choices. The sort of mono-choice we had from circa 1970s as our cities declined to the current day of auto dependence and low-density sprawl and all the environmental and social and economic consequences of that was not about choice. That was really about a kind of engineering of the physical and economic landscape. So I think regionalism is bringing choice back to America. In many respects, competition back, because for a long time we subsidized highways to the detriment of transit, right? We subsidized the auto to the detriment of walking and biking, which if we all participated in would radically lower our health care expenses. So, there is a paranoid strain in American history. There really is. I mean, if you go back in our history, there is a strain. Sometimes it manifests itself as populism, so to speak. But it basically tries to stop change and impede change. And again, the reason why we are so powerful and resilient as a country is because we embrace change. And right now we are living through the most, probably, not just a pivotal decade, one of the most disruptive decades in a long, long, long time. You have to really go back to the early part of the 20th century to have this kind of disruption, technological disruption, global disruption happening at the same time. I think regionalism is a way for places and people to adapt to that disruption so that, again, in our own lives, we can realize our own potential and our communities can realize our potential. That's not to say that folks will not try to fight it, try to preserve, but it's what makes a democracy a democracy. So let the debate play out. I think regionalism is, frankly, very much aligned and attuned to the values and aspirations of most families in this country and most communities. Thank you for the question.
Bruce, in answer to Mayor Plisquellic and to the student from Gilmore, I thought you did a good job of encapsulating the importance of how we collaborate to compete,
right,
how important that is. But I'm wondering if in your travels around the country you could point to one or two specific metros that are doing the best job of that, and what they're doing to make it successful.
So that's a great question from Dave Abbott, and I think, the story in the book is about Denver, because Denver's a metropolis of about 2 million people. They hate when I say this, but they're in the middle of nowhere. They don't have Case Western, and they don't have the Cleveland Clinic, and they were an extraction economy for a long time that headed south in the oil and gas bust of the 1980s. So what happened in Denver, I think, because of their crisis, frankly, never waste a crisis, right, is they began to put aside some old city and suburban divisions that emerged in the 1960s and 1970s, particularly around school integration. And they began to look at each other, mayors, political leaders, business and civic leaders, and say, we better start working together or we will be history. Because no one has to come here, really, right? We don't have what many other communities in the United States have, except for a beautiful landscape, but we don't have the advanced research and the advanced industry. So they began to take baby steps. They began as a region to invest in arts and culture, because that's usually an early step to build social cohesion. Even in Detroit, which has been a long divided place for a long time, the suburban counties voted to invest in the Detroit Institute of Arts last year because people care about this. But then they began to think more aspirationally around global connectivity, built this incredible airport, and most importantly, in the last decade, they have designed, financed, and begun to deliver a 118-mile light rail system. It's the largest light rail system in the United States, but it's not just about transit, it's about land use and zoning so that they can change their physical landscape to get closer to the environmental sensibility and ethic of the West. And begin to sell themselves, frankly, as Portland has sold themselves, as a sustainable metropolis built to last for the 21st century. So I go to Denver a lot, and I sit with political and business and civic leaders, and I cannot tell you that they all love each other. They don't, particularly when someone leaves the room. They'll be pretty frank about stuff. But when it comes to economic prosperity and when it comes to economic competitiveness, it is not a game. It is serious business. And they put aside their differences and they collaborate to compete on the global stage. And I think that's a message. Chicago did that for many years under Mayor Daley. And Chicago is sort of like an elbows out kind of region, right? But they sat together as a Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus 4 times a year, and they said, what's the biggest threat to our economy from our region or from the country or from the world, and what's the biggest opportunity we can have to leverage? And they began to prioritize the kind of investments they need to make. So it's not easy, right? Because it's almost cultural and behavioral at times to have these divisions. And frankly, there is a group of the political class that likes to divide us, city and suburb, or metro and rural. But we are united, our economy is integrated, and an economy is powerful. So it really is within the potential of any region in this United States. You don't need permission from the state government or from Washington, which is in a planetary system far away. You don't need permission to collaborate. It can become a natural act, and once it begins and you begin to experience the advantages of it and the benefits of it, as you've done with Fund for an Economic Future and Nortec and Bioenterprise, then you want to do more, right? And that becomes the gift that keeps on giving. So this is a great metropolis and this is a great region. We have everything that the rest of the world wants, right? Everything they want. They want clean water, they want advanced research, they want advanced industry, they want a skilled workforce, they want rule of law, and they want capital to invest. We have everything the rest of the world wants here. It's just a question of understanding that and leveraging that. And I think you already are on the right path. And whenever Washington goes on a frolic and leaves the building, or whenever your state does more harm than good, just keep on the right path. Because that's the only way to prosperity for the broader citizenry.
Bruce, thank you for your comments in this conversation. I'm Andrew Watterson with Brown Flynn. My question is specifically for the CEOs, and maybe this will help you prepare for next week, but what specific advice would you give to a CEO on how to engage in shaping this conversation or shaping the metropolitan revolution?
Well, I think the role of the business community is absolutely essential, right? Because you can make a better case than someone from a think tank, right, or from a philanthropy or from government about what your needs are to compete today and to prosper tomorrow, right? I mean, and again, it's not a rocket science. When I talk to most CEOs of companies, large, medium, and small, we need a talented workforce. We need an infrastructure that is modern and sophisticated, right, to move people. And this is about retrofit in many parts of the country because we're an older country in the Midwest. And we need this constant, sustained investment in basic and applied science so that we can begin to invent, generate the ideas, but then retool products and services for ourselves, for the country, and for the world. So, you know, there's a book out. I'm not saying buy another book because, you know, it's mostly important to buy this book. Very important to buy this book. I don't get any royalties, by the way. There's a book out called The Entrepreneurial State. It's by an economist in England. And it basically makes a point, which is a very simple point. Those countries that invest for the future, particularly around innovation, particularly around basic and applied science, are the countries that win over time. And then, in accompanying that, invest in the infrastructure, invest in the talent. Again, that is why we are who we are. You know, people talk about Silicon Valley and like, wow, they must be drinking some kind of water out there. No, they have Stanford. In the aftermath of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War, we made consistent, sustained investments in innovation, particularly in the military, that then became commercialized into the civilian sector. That's why Silicon Valley grew, and that's why they've continued to be a world-beating region.
I'm Kurt Carrico from the Third Federal Foundation, and I think you hit it on the head about talented people. Yet we have an urban educational system that has a dropout rate of 50%.
Right.
Here in Cuyahoga County, 47% of the adult population reads at a 7th grade level or less. We have jobs that they can't fill because there aren't people with the literacy skills to do that. So what do we do with our educational system to try to create these talented people to fill these jobs?
I think we need I think this is actually a fundamental question. I think we need a different vision for education in this country. Because the vision for education that we've had for a long time is we got to get everyone on a path to a 4-year degree because we're now a post-industrial economy, right? And I think our vision is essentially we need to give kids the tools and the choices, right? The technical schools, the technology training they need, and then they can make the choice whether they want to work now, go to a community college, or go to a 4-year. The STEM economy, the science, technology, engineering, and math economy, we used to think of as an economy with about 3% of our GDP. That was only occupied by the brainiacs from Stanford and MIT. It's actually about 20% of the GDP of this country, all right? Inching to 25% if you count in some other sectors. A large portion of the jobs in the STEM economy can be filled by people coming out of high school with the right skills or coming out of community colleges. And then that doesn't even count all the other jobs that are available in the portion of the economy that is stimulated by the STEM economy. So we've got to go back to some fundamentals here. We cannot teach to test, right? We've got to give kids coming into school more choices about what they learn and how they learn. I could take you to a school today on the west side of Chicago in a neighborhood of 98% African American. Kids come into high school with 3rd or 4th grade reading and math. They leave with credentials to immediately work as skilled electricians and skilled welders in real firms with real jobs, good wages, and good benefits. We have stigmatized manufacturing in this country, right? The Germans didn't, and 20% of their economy is manufacturing. So this is cultural and behavioral in some ways. We have got to step back and imagine an economy where we make things again. And then we have to allow a broader set of our citizenry to engage in that. And I think you've got lots of kids who drop out because, frankly, you know, we all been there, right? You're sitting class after class after class. What does this have to do with anything in my life? Trust me, when we begin to give people tangible, concrete sense of what they can do with education, then they begin to engage. Not everyone, but a large portion. We really have to help people find themselves and not live in a regimented kind of system. So if you want to, you know, go on to your next challenge as a region, reinvent vocational education, career and technical services for the 21st century, and then you will clearly be on the path to sustained prosperity.
Today at the City Club, we've been listening to a Friday Forum featuring Bruce Katz, the founding director of the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program and co-author of the Metropolitan Revolution. For those of you just turning in and wanting an executive summary, here it is. The future of America is its metro and regions. The future of metro regions is networking. The future and the key to networking, donuts and beer. Thank you, Bruce. Ladies and gentlemen, the program is now adjourned. Okay.